They didn't just cut me out of the wedding. They tried to erase me like never been her father. I was tightening a bolt on a '67 Mustang when the call came through. It was late March in Cincinnati, the kind of damp evening where the chill clung to your bones. My breath fogged in the air beneath the harsh flicker of a fluorescent light, and the familiar scent of motor oil and metal wrapped around me like a second skin. The phone buzzed across my greasy workbench, screen glowing with my daughter's name, Emily. I wiped my hands on a rag, heart lifting just to see her number. She didn't call much anymore. Dad. Her voice was flat, rehearsed, like she was reading from someone else's script. At first I laughed. Thought she was joking, maybe teasing me about my suit choice. What do you mean I said I'm not invited? The pause that followed was the kind of silence that could split a man in two. It's Seppa's mom Sit's wish. She thinks it's set to be better this way. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're listening from. My eyes dropped to the desk. There it was, the cashier's check for $80,000, sealed in an envelope, edges crisp, my handwriting neat across the front. It had taken me years of sweat in this workshop, busted knuckles, long nights, rebuilt engines to scrape that money together. And 2 nights ago, I sat right here and told myself giving it away was the right thing. The final gift after the $25,000 venue deposit, the $9,300 florist bill, the $14,600 catering invoice. That check was supposed to be my last act of love. And now I wasn't said even welcome. My chest tightened. Memories came flooding back, one after the other, as sharp as the tools hanging on my pegboard. Emily in the dentist's chair with braces, clutching my hand. Emily in a blue prom dress, spinning while I tried not to cry in front of her date. Emily walking across her college campus. Tuition checks signed by my hand tucked safely in her file. Years of sacrifice. Years of being there. And with one sentence, she had cut me out of her life. Emily. My voice cracked under the weight of her name. Are you really telling me that your father, the man who Seps paid for nearly every part of this wedding, can Sept even sit in the pews and watch you walk down the aisle? I said, sorry, Dad, she whispered. It's Sep's just, Mom thinks it's Sep's for the best. Please don't make this harder. And then the line went dead. I sat frozen, the workshop suddenly too quiet, too still. Outside, a train groaned along the tracks behind the alley, its horn blasting through the night, but all I could hear was her voice. You're not invited. The envelope on my desk seemed to sneer at me. $80,000, money that could have gone toward fixing up the shop, securing my retirement, maybe even finally taking a trip somewhere warm. But I had been ready to hand it over, to buy myself a seat at my own daughter's wedding. My keys were in my hand before I realized it. I was halfway to the door, half ready to drive across town, knock on her door, press that envelope into her palm, and beg her to let me in. That's what guilt wanted. That's what years of being made to feel small whispered in my ear. But I stopped. I thought of my ex-wife, her bitter eyes, the way she had spent years twisting knives into the soft parts of me. Unstable, she had called me behind my back to anyone who'd listen. I knew her hand was in this. Cutting me out was her final victory lap. I sat back down, hands trembling, grease darkening the cracks in my skin. My workshop clock ticked above the door, 8:47 p.m. The second hand swept in steady circles, like it knew something I didn't. A voice echoed in my head. My sister's voice, calm and firm, the same way she'd spoken when I nearly folded in the past. You already gave her everything. If she can't see it, money won't change it. I picked up the envelope, held it for a long moment, then slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, turned the key, and let the lock click shut. The sound was sharp, final, like a gavel coming down. For once, I wasn't moving toward guilt. I was holding my ground. That night, I stayed in the workshop. I poured a glass of cheap bourbon, the ice clinking against the tumbler, and let the burn cut through the numbness. I thought about the baseball games I never missed, the scraped knees I bandaged, the nights I stayed awake until she got home. Had it all been invisible to her, or had someone poisoned her against me until she forgot? I didn't know. But I knew one thing, I wasn't an ATM, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let them erase me without a fight. I set the empty glass down and walked to the front of the workshop. Cincinnati's night air bit at my face, sharp and damp. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. I locked the door behind me, keys heavy in my pocket, and stood in the dark alley. For the first time in years, I felt something other than guilt. It was faint, like a spark under cold ashes. But it was there. Resolve. The check was locked away. My seat at her wedding was gone, but my dignity, my story, that was still mine. And I wasn't set finished. Not by a long shot. The morning after that call, Cincinnati skies were overcast, gray as the oil stains on my garage floor. I came into the workshop early, hoping the smell of grease and steel might ground me. Instead, the first thing I saw on my desk was another envelope, this one from the florist. $9,300. Paid. My name scribbled across the bottom of the receipt. Right underneath it sat the catering invoice. $14,620. Also paid. Also me. I picked them up, one in each hand. Paper thin as tissue, but heavy as anvils on my chest. I had already poured enough into that wedding to buy a house in some parts of town. Yet here I was, staring at proof that I was nothing more than an open wallet. I dropped the receipts back on the desk. The locked drawer where I'd hidden the $80,000 check seemed to hum, like it knew I was still tempted. I caught myself thinking, maybe if I just hand it over, maybe if I keep my mouth shut, she'll realize I'm not the enemy. Maybe it'll fix things. That's guilt talking. Guilt had been my closest companion for years. Guilt for the divorce. Guilt for not being enough. Guilt for every fight that drove my daughter closer to her mother. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Emily. It was my sister Ruth. She didn't waste time on greetings. Tell me you didn't give her that check. I hesitated. It sits still locked in the drawer. Good. Brandon, listen to me. Her voice was steady, the way it always was when mine cracked. You already gave her everything. If she can see that by now, money one sit change it. Don't sit you dare pay for your own erasure. Her words cut through the fog. I sat back, stared at the Mustang I'd been working on, its hood open like a chest cavity, a mess of wires and pistons, broken things I could fix with my hands. But this betrayal? No wrench could put it right. That afternoon I went to pick up parts downtown. Cincinnati in late March is unpredictable. Patches of sun breaking through clouds, then rain a moment later. On the way I overheard whispers I wasn't supposed to. At a coffee shop near the courthouse, two relatives from my ex-wife's side sat at a table behind me. Linda says Brandon is unstable, one of them said, her voice dripping pity. It's better he stays away. Imagine the scene he cause. Unstable. The word rolled over me like acid. She'd used that label before, back when she wanted to win the custody arguments. Now she was dusting it off again, painting me as a liability. The unstable father, the embarrassment to be hidden away. I clenched my jaw and walked out before they noticed me. The receipts in my pocket crinkled loud as gunfire. That evening I unlocked the drawer, stared at the envelope one more time. The check practically begged me to cave, to believe that money could buy me back into her life. But Ruth's words echoed louder. Don't pay for your own erasure. So I locked it again. This time I pushed the key deeper into my pocket, fingers curled around it like a lifeline. And that seps when the phone rang again. It was Emily, her tone clipped, rushed. Dad, did you send the balance yet? We can finalize the venue without it. I swallowed hard. No, Emily, I didn't stut. Her sigh cut me. Mom said you make this difficult. Difficult? My voice rose before I could stop it. I paid for the flowers, the food, the venue. Does that sound like difficult to you? Silence, just breathing on the other end. Then, softer, you are ruining everything. The line went dead again. I sat there in my shop, the tick of the wall clock sinking with the pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, wanted to tear the invoices to shreds. Instead, I laid them out on the Mustang's hood, the florist, the catering, the venue, like evidence in a case only I seemed to be building. That night, I couldn't sleep. My ex-wife's lies echoed in my head, bouncing against my daughter's voice, calling me difficult. The workshop felt too quiet, the shadows too loud. I poured another bourbon and stared at the locked drawer. Guilt still clawed at me, but a new feeling had started to grow beside it. Not just resolve this time. Something sharper. Anger. The kind that didn't burn wild, but smoldered low and steady, like coals waiting for the right breath of air. And I promised myself, come morning, I'd stop letting them write the story. The rehearsal was held on a Friday in early April, a week before the wedding. Cincinnati spring had finally started to soften, trees budding, air carrying that faint smell of rain and cut grass. I parked my truck outside the church, heart pounding like I was sneaking into a place I didn't belong. Inside, voices echoed against the high ceilings. Laughter, footsteps, music tuning, families weaving together, except me. I walked down the aisle, slow, cautious. I looked for a seat with my name on it, a place set aside for the man who had written every check. Row after row was filled with names of cousins, distant relatives, co-workers of my ex-wife's new husband, but not mine. I stood there in the middle, alone, the sound of organ practice swelling around me. That's when I caught it. A voice in the lobby, just beyond the sanctuary doors. Emily. I moved closer, careful not to be seen. Her back was to me, her hair pinned in curls for the rehearsal. She was talking to her maid of honor. Dad Sep's just an ATM, she said, casual, almost laughing. He always pays. The words landed harder than any fist. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My daughter, my little girl, reducing me to a machine, a transaction. I pulled my phone from my pocket with trembling hands, hit record and let it capture the sentence I wished I could forget. Dad Sep's just an ATM. He always pays. Proof, not for the world, not yet, but for me. To remind me I wasn't crazy, that the betrayal was real, and not just something I invented in the loneliness of my workshop. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Behind me, I heard a whisper. My ex-wife Linda leaning close to her cousin near the church pews. You see now? He sets unstable. Better this way. Her voice dripped poison, smooth and rehearsed, and her cousin nodded, swallowing the lie whole. My face burned hot. I turned, walked down the side aisle, my boots heavy on the old wooden floor. I felt eyes glance at me, then away, like I was a ghost that shouldn't have been there. No one stopped me. No one asked me to sit. I pushed the side door open and stepped out into the damp April air. The church bells tolled the hour above me, but all I heard was the echo of my daughter's voice. Dad's just an ATM. I leaned against the truck, phone heavy in my pocket, receipts folded in my jacket. For the first time, I realized just how deep the betrayal went. It wasn't just exclusion, it was erasure. I sat there until the sun dipped low, until families trickled out of the church laughing, arms linked, holding programs. They walked past me like I wasn't there. When Emily finally came out, she didn't even look my way. She walked straight to her fiancé's car, climbed in, and shut the door. I stayed in my truck until the lot was empty. My reflection stared back from the windshield, tired eyes, jaw tight, shoulders slumped. I didn't look like a father anymore. I looked like a stranger. Driving home, Cincinnati's streetlights flickered to life. I turned onto my block, workshop neon buzzing faintly in the night. The place had always been my refuge, my temple, but that evening it felt hollow. Inside, I laid the receipts on the hood of the Mustang again. This time I added the phone beside them, one recording, one voice, one undeniable truth. Dad Sip's just an ATM. I replayed it once, twice, until the words carved themselves into my bones. Each time I heard it, something inside me shifted. The guilt that had gnawed at me began to shrivel. The anger, the steady, smoldering anger, grew stronger. By midnight, I knew. I wasn't going to be the ghost at their wedding. I wasn't going to hand them the check like a fool begging for recognition. I was going to fight. Not with screaming or scenes, not with fists or cruelty, but with the one thing they hadn't counted on, truth backed by paper, backed by proof. Because ghosts might be invisible. But I wasn't sit. Not yet. The Monday after the rehearsal, the city felt heavier. Cincinnati skies were pale, washed-out blue, like they couldn't decide if spring had arrived or not. I drove downtown with the $80,000 cashier's check tucked in my jacket. I hadn't slept much. The recording of Emily's voice still echoed in my ears. "Dad's just an ATM. He always pays." My ex-wife's whisper followed right behind it. "He's unstable. Better this way." The envelope sat on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. Every red light I stopped at, I felt its weight pressing against me, daring me to cave, to walk into the bank, turn it over, and let them win. When I pulled into the lot on Vine Street, my palms were slick with sweat. The bank's glass doors reflected me back. A man in his 50s, shoulders hunched, jaw clenched, eyes lined from years of work. I didn't look like an ATM. I looked like a father fighting not to disappear. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and copier toner. I stepped up to the counter, slid the envelope forward. "I need to cancel this," I said. The teller, a young guy in a pressed shirt, looked confused. "Sir, this is a cashier SIP's check. They don't test usually get canceled." "I know." My voice cracked but didn't set break. "But this one does." He studied me for a second, then nodded. One moment, he disappeared into the back, leaving me alone with the marble floor, the muted buzz of conversations, the hum of fluorescent lights. My heart hammered like a piston inside my chest. What if I was wrong? What if canceling this made me the villain they said I was? What if it proved Emily right, that I was difficult, bitter, unstable? The teller returned with his supervisor, a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses. She laid the envelope on the counter, opened it, and examined the check. "You Setter the purchaser?" "Yes." She stamped the check in bold red letters. "VOI'd." The sound echoed louder than a gavel. "Funds will return to your account in 48 hours, she said calmly. "Do you need documentation?" "Yes." My hands shook as I accepted the paper slip she slid across to me. Date, time, transaction ID, proof. I folded it neatly, slipped it into my jacket pocket alongside the receipts, invoices, and the recording on my phone. Another brick in the wall I was quietly building. When I stepped back outside, the air felt sharper, fresher. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, hitting the sidewalk in a way that made the world look new. I stood there, staring at the stamped word burned into my memory, void. The grief hit me first, a crushing wave that nearly doubled me over. Canceling that check felt like canceling a piece of Emily herself. The little girl who once hugged my leg, who used to climb into the cab of my truck with sticky hands and ask me to play her favorite songs. That check had been meant for her future. But then came the relief. Cold, clean, cutting through the grief like a knife through rope. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't bending. I wasn't paying for love that was never given back. I walked slowly to my truck, the paper slip safe in my pocket. A man at the bus stop glanced at me, probably wondering why I looked like I'd just walked out of a courtroom. He didn't know he wasn't far off. I started the engine, let it idle. The rumble steadied me. "Not this time," I whispered into the spring air. Driving back toward the shop, the city looked different. The same cracked sidewalks, the same faded murals, but lighter somehow. Or maybe it was me. Maybe the weight I'd been carrying had finally begun to shift. Back in the workshop, I pinned the cancellation slip to the corkboard above my desk. Right beside the florist bill, the catering invoice, the venue receipt, my evidence wall, a story written in numbers and ink. That night, I sat alone again, bourbon glass sweating in my hand. The neon hum outside the window seemed louder, like it knew something had changed. I thought about Emily, about how she'd react when the vendors realized the balance wasn't coming, about how Linda would spin the story, twisting it until I was the villain. I braced myself for the storm I knew was coming. But under the fear, there was something else. A flicker of strength, the kind that comes when you realize you've finally stopped giving away pieces of yourself. By midnight, I'd made peace with it. The check was void, the money safe, the future they'd planned for me, silent father, invisible man, ATM until the end, was canceled. And in its place, a new plan began to form. One they wouldn't see coming. The week of the wedding arrived, and Cincinnati buzzed with spring energy, blooming dogwoods, food trucks parked along Fountain Square, students spilling out of classrooms, But in my world, the season smelled less like flowers and more like smoke. Because while they toasted to their future, I was preparing to burn their plans to ash. Mark, my oldest friend and a lawyer, who had seen me through more than one scrape, leaned across my workshop desk. His tie was loosened, jacket tossed over the back of a chair. Brandon, you sit got the receipts, the canceled check, even the recording. That SIP's not just evidence, that SIP's leverage. I slid the florist and catering invoices across the desk. They think I shall just swallow the humiliation. They think I shall let them call me unstable while draining me dry. Mark studied the papers, his brow tightening. You don't need revenge. You need justice. And the law sips on your side. I nodded. Justice. That word sat easier on my chest than revenge did, though they smelled like the same fire. By Wednesday, Mark had filed liens against the prepaid vendors, motions that froze certain accounts tied to the wedding. He called it protective action. I called it my line in the sand. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled at the downtown Hyatt ballroom. I hadn't set planned to go, but Mark insisted, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. You need to see this through, quietly, calmly. Let the papers speak for you. That Friday evening, I walked through the Hyatt's revolving doors. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Laughter spilled from the ballroom, glasses clinking, forks scraping plates. I stood at the back, half hidden behind a column. Emily was radiant in a white rehearsal dress, glowing under the lights. For a moment I almost forgot. Almost believed she was still my little girl. But then I saw Linda at the head of the table, raising a glass, her smile smug and satisfied. A process server in a navy blazer slipped through the crowd. Folder in hand, he moved with quiet precision, like a surgeon. Linda Hayes, he asked, stopping at the head of the table. Her smile faltered. Yes? He handed her the documents. You've been served. Gasps rippled through the room like a stone hitting water. Forks clattered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Emily's face went pale, her fiancé stiff beside her. Linda tore open the envelope, eyes scanning the words, her lips tightened. She looked up, searching the crowd, and her gaze landed on me. For one suspended second, the whole ballroom followed her eyes until they found me, standing still, silent, not hiding anymore. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, didn't explain. I just stood there, letting the weight of truth settle around us. Linda slammed the folder shut and hissed something to her new husband. He sputtered, trying to regain composure, but the whispers were already spreading like wildfire through the tables. Lawsuit, lay-ins, canceled check. Emily rose from her seat, eyes wide, trembling. She took a step toward me, then stopped, caught between rage and shame. I held her gaze but said nothing, because the time for words had passed. The server nodded to me as he left the ballroom, his job complete. I turned and walked out, the sound of my boots against marble echoing louder than the chatter rising behind me. Outside, the spring air wrapped around me, cool and steady. My truck waited at the curb. As I slid into the driver's seat, I caught one last glimpse through the glass doors. Linda clutching the papers, Emily gripping the edge of the table, guests buzzing with speculation. I started the engine, the Mustang's rebuilt growl filling the night. For the first time in weeks, my hands didn't shake on the wheel. Because revenge wasn't about shouting. It wasn't about scenes or fists. It was about truth, brought into the light at the exact moment it mattered most. Back at the workshop, I poured a bourbon and sat in silence. The corkboard above my desk was filling florist bill, catering invoice, venue receipt, cancellation slip, and now a copy of the filed liens. A mosaic of betrayal and proof. The bourbon burned, but not as much as the thought of Emily's face when those papers landed. Anger, confusion, maybe even the faintest flicker of regret. I leaned back, let the neon hum outside seep into the quiet. That night I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for money. I wasn't just fighting against Linda. I was fighting for my name, for the truth that I wasn't unstable. I wasn't an ATM. I was a father who had already given everything, and refused to be erased. By Monday morning, the fallout had already begun. Vendors aren't patient when money goes missing. They're quicker than family, sharper than friends. They have contracts, deadlines, and balance sheets that don't forgive. The first knock came just after I opened the workshop. Sunlight spilled across the Mustang's hood, tools neatly lined, coffee steaming in my mug. Then a shadow filled the doorway. "Mr. Hayes?" A man in a polo shirt stepped in, clipboard in hand. I set him with Cincy florals. "We haven't received the final payment. Thought maybe you had an update?" I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. His eyes darted to the bouquet of invoices pinned to my corkboard. He knew I wasn't some deadbeat. "Bizef already paid 9,300, I said flatly. "You still want to check with the bride and her mother for the rest." He frowned, shifted awkwardly. "We were told you were handling the balance." I met his gaze, steady. Not anymore. By afternoon, the caterer showed up. A woman with tired eyes and a folder tucked under her arm. She spread her paperwork across the Mustang's hood like it was a courtroom table. "Mr. Hayes, the balance of 14,600 is outstanding. Our staff has orders. Food prep is scheduled. Are you sure this isn't a mistake?" I pulled open a drawer, retrieved my copy of the invoice, and laid it beside hers. Same date, same total. My signature already on the deposit line. Paid my part. You still need to talk to Emily or Linda for the rest. Her lips pressed thin. She gathered her papers, shook her head, and left without another word. By Tuesday, word had spread. Vendors called, emailed, even stopped me on the street. My answer never changed. Talk to the bride, talk to her mother. My part's done. It wasn't long before Emily herself stormed into the workshop. The door slammed against the wall, her heels clicking sharp against the concrete floor. "How could you do this?" She spat, eyes blazing. "You humiliated Mom at the dinner. You stores sabotaging everything." I didn't flinch. I picked up the florist receipt, the catering invoice, the cancellation slip, and spread them across the hood of the Mustang. Evidence in neat rows, glinting under the fluorescent light. "I paid for this wedding," I said, my voice steady but cold. "The venue, the flowers, the food, and you erased me." Her face crumpled, just for a second. A flicker of guilt flashed in her eyes. But pride, anger, and her mother's influence smothered it quickly. "You stare ruining my life," she hissed. "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped ruining mine." She grabbed the edge of the invoice, crumpled it in her fist, and threw it back on the hood. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out, the slam of the door rattling the windows. Silence filled the shop again, just me, the hum of the fluorescent light, and the evidence laid bare. I sat on the stool, head in my hands. Part of me still ached, still wanted to chase her down, explain, beg her to see. But another part, the stronger part, held firm. By Wednesday, the vendors stopped coming to me. They went straight to Linda and Emily, and that's when the cracks started to show. Calls rang unanswered. Promises fell apart. Word circled fast through the vendor network. The Hayes wedding was a financial disaster. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was speaking for itself. That night, Ruth called me. Her voice was warm, steady, the way it always was when I doubted myself. "Brandon, I know this hurts, but you did the right thing. You didn't abandon her. She abandoned you. And there's us difference." I closed my eyes. Let her words settle. "It doesn't feel like it, Ruth. Feels like I just watched my daughter walk out of my life." "Sometimes," she said softly, "they have to lose what they took for granted to understand what it was worth." Her words carried me through the night. By Thursday, I was back under the hood of the Mustang, grease under my nails, sweat on my brow. Work steadied me. Machines didn't lie. Engines didn't manipulate. They either worked or they didn't. Simple, honest truth. And as the wrench clicked into place, I realized something. Linda had tried to brand me as unstable. Emily had called me an ATM. The vendors had looked at me like a debtor. But standing there, hands steady on my craft, I knew the truth. I wasn't set unstable. I wasn't set an ATM. I was a father who had given everything. And now I was a man reclaiming what was left. May arrived with a heat that didn't feel like spring. Cincinnati air clung heavy, the kind that makes your shirt stick before you've even reached your truck. I knew the wedding chaos had boiled over, but what came next wasn't a banquet or bouquet toss. It was court. The county courthouse sat on Main Street, red brick and solemn, the kind of building that made you feel small even before you walked inside. I stood at the bottom of the steps that morning, tie choking me, papers tucked under my arm. Receipts, invoices, the voided check, even the recording of my daughter's words, all packed in a folder. My weapons weren't fists or fury. They were proof. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead. Families sat scattered in pew-like benches, murmuring, waiting for their turn at justice. I caught a glimpse of Linda across the aisle, her jaw tight, lips pinched. Emily sat beside her, pale but defiant, her fiancé whispering something in her ear. My stomach churned, but I held Ruth's words in my head like armor. Don't pay for your own erasure. The bailiff called our case, Hayes versus Hayes. I rose, legs stiff, and walked to the plaintiff's table with Mark at my side. He gave me a nod, steady and sure. Let the truth do the heavy lifting, he whispered. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s, sharp eyes above silver frames. The gavel cracked once, silencing the room. Mr. Hayes, she began. Voice firm, you are petitioning the court regarding financial claims surrounding your daughter Sep's wedding expenditures. Please explain why you canceled the $80,000 cashier Sep's check. Her eyes locked onto me. For a heartbeat, doubt pierced me. My throat went dry. What if she thought I was the unstable one? What if Linda had already poisoned the water here too? I cleared my throat, forcing my voice steady. Because, Your Honor, I had already paid the venue deposit of $25,000, the florist $9,300, the catering $14,620, and then I was told I wasn't invited to my daughter's wedding, that I wasn't welcome. Gasps stirred in the benches. I slid the receipts forward. Here is proof of payment. The judge studied them, expression unreadable, then her gaze flicked to Linda. Mrs. Hayes, your response. Linda rose, her lawyer smoothing papers beside her. She spoke with a calm, rehearsed tone, the same voice she'd used in 100 arguments before. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes has a history of emotional instability. This was an act of retaliation. The wedding was meant to be a peaceful event, but he has chosen to make it about control. Murmurs rippled again. I clenched my fists under the table, unstable. There it was, her favorite dagger. Mark leaned forward. Permission to play a short recording, Your Honor. The judge nodded. I pulled my phone from my pocket, fingers steady now, and pressed play. Emily Sepp's voice filled the courtroom. Dad Sepp's just an ATM. He always pays. The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. Emily's face went crimson. Her fiancé shifted uncomfortably, whispering something that only made her shoulders tighten. Mark spoke, his voice cutting clean. Your Honor, this recording was taken at the wedding rehearsal. Combined with these receipts, it demonstrates a clear pattern. My client was reduced to a source of money, erased as a father, and then smeared as unstable when he refused further exploitation. The judge turned back to Linda. Mrs. Hayes, do you dispute these payments? Linda Sepp's mouth opened, then closed. Her lawyer shuffled papers, buying time. Finally, she shook her head. No, Your Honor. But the judge raised a hand. Enough, this court isn't interested in gossip or character smears. Responsibility follows the money trail. She tapped the receipts with her pen, then looked at the voided check Mark slid forward. Mr. Hayes acted within his rights. Canceling this check was not retaliation. It was protection of his own assets. The fiancé, red-faced, blurted out, This is ridiculous. He Sepp's trying to ruin us. The judge Sepp's eyes cut sharp. Sit down, sir. Or you sit or be removed. Silence fell, heavy and final. Mark pressed on, calm as a surgeon. We request restitution of deposits, release of liens, and recognition of Mr. Hayes Sipps's financial stake in these proceedings. The judge leaned back, considering. The ceiling fans creaked overhead. Then she nodded once, firm. So ordered. The contested assets are frozen until further review. Vendors are to be reimbursed proportionally. Mr. Hayes' Sefcig's contributions are recognized in full. The gavel cracked. The sound wasn't just wood on wood. It was the collapse of everything they'd tried to build on my back. I exhaled, long and shaking. The courtroom seemed brighter somehow. Lighter. My evidence folder sat open on the table. Proof that I wasn't unstable. I wasn't an ATM. I was a man who had fought with truth and won. Across the aisle, Linda's face had gone pale, her mouth set in a hard line. Emily refused to meet my eyes, staring instead at the floor. Her fiancé sat rigid, jaw clenched, the weight of debt pressing onto his shoulders. Mark leaned close, voice low. "That sip's the sound of justice, Brandon." As I left the courtroom, Ruth was waiting in the hallway. She pulled me into a hug, whispering, "Told you. You sept stronger than their lies." For the first time in months, I believed her. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed in the midday sun. Cincinnati traffic rolled past, horns blaring, life moving on. But I stood still for a moment. Folder clutched in my hand, the word "void" stamped not just on a check, but on the life they tried to script for me. They wanted me broken. Instead, I walked away whole. Because the courtroom didn't break me. It broke them. The ruling came down on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the cracks in their perfect wedding began to spread like fractures in glass. I wasn't there to see it firsthand. I didn't need to be. Vendors talk. News travels fast when money dries up. The florist was the first domino. Their delivery truck, already packed with white roses and lilies, never left the shop. With assets frozen, the balance unpaid, the flowers sat wilting in buckets instead of gracing the church aisles. By noon, the caterer pulled the plug. $14,600 short. She couldn't risk feeding 200 guests on promises and gossip. Her staff boxed up what little had been prepped, redistributed it to other events, and crossed Emily's wedding off the calendar. I heard the venue manager's voicemail secondhand. "Without cleared funds, we cannot proceed. Access revoked." The $25,000 deposit I had paid kept them polite, but not enough to open doors without the rest. By evening, the Hyatt ballroom was a ghost town. Round tables draped in white cloth stood bare. No centerpieces, no food, no music, just emptiness echoing where laughter was supposed to be. I pictured Linda pacing the room, phone pressed to her ear, spinning excuse after excuse. I imagined Emily in tears, makeup streaking, the fiancé clenching his jaw, realizing the empire they'd built on my back was collapsing. Guests started to whisper. Word trickled through group texts and phone calls. Wedding off, venue canceled, vendors pulling out. By Saturday morning, the gossip had become wildfire. Cousins arrived at the church only to find locked doors. Others showed up at the hotel, suit bags in hand, only to be told the reception was canceled. They stood in the lobby with confused faces, luggage at their feet, murmuring among themselves. And there was Linda, red-faced, scrambling to explain. Some said she blamed me outright, told anyone who'd listen that I sabotaged everything out of spite. But whispers spread quicker than lies. People remembered the process server at the rehearsal dinner, the papers handed over in front of 200 eyes. They remembered the hush that followed, the shock on Emily's face. Truth had a way of walking into the room even when I wasn't there. By Sunday afternoon, the wedding was officially called off. Not postponed, not rescheduled, collapsed. Vendors blacklisted them. Contracts were void. Guests went home shaking their heads, telling the story of that wedding that never happened. And me? I was in my workshop, wiping grease from my hands, radio humming low in the background. When the call came from a distant cousin, "Brandon, it's over," the whole thing fell apart. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. Because this wasn't about winning, it was about surviving with my dignity intact. That night, I sat on the porch, bourbon glass in hand, fireflies blinking in the yard. The air smelled of cut grass and rain. For the first time, I felt calm. Not because they were humiliated, not because their empire of lies had collapsed, but because I hadn't caved, because I hadn't paid for my own erasure. Somewhere across town, my daughter sat in a hotel room surrounded by empty garment bags in silence. Somewhere, Linda tried to spin a story no one believed. Somewhere, the fiancé stared at a pile of debts with no father-in-law ATM to bail him out. And me? I still had my workshop, my Mustang, my name. The wedding that was supposed to erase me had erased itself. The courthouse was quieter the day I returned, 2 weeks after the wedding had collapsed. No guests in fancy clothes, no whispers of celebration gone wrong, just lawyers, clerks, and the shuffle of papers. Mark walked beside me, his leather briefcase swinging, calm as always. Today's Septus not about drama, he said. Is Septus about closure? Closure. I wasn't sure I believed in that word anymore, but I followed him into the chamber anyway, folder in hand. Receipts, invoices, cancellation slip, my constant companions. The judge was the same, sharp eyes behind silver frames. She studied the documents Mark presented, proof of my deposits, evidence of canceled balances, motions showing my assets tied to the wedding. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice steady, this court recognizes your payments in full. Vendors will be reimbursed proportionally. You are not liable for remaining debts. Furthermore, restitution of your deposits will be made. Her gavel cracked. Just like that, the ledger was balanced. It wasn't about money anymore. But hearing her say it, on record, undeniable, felt like a weight lifting. Linda's lawyer muttered something about appeals, but even he didn't sound convinced. Linda sat stiff, eyes hollow. Emily didn't even look up. Her fiancé fiddled with his tie. Face red, the image of a man watching his plans disintegrate. The judge looked at me one last time. Mr. Hayes' responsibility follows the money trail, and that trail leads back to you. You, Sep, fulfilled your obligations. Your name is cleared. Those words echoed in me, louder than the gavel. Your name is cleared. Afterward, Mark clapped me on the shoulder. You see, justice doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it sets just ink on paper and a judge sets word. I nodded, though inside it felt like more. It felt like reclaiming something I didn't know I'd lost. Not just money, not just dignity, but my very place in the story. Outside, Ruth waited on the courthouse steps. She wrapped me in a hug, her voice warm against my ear. Told you, you such not unstable. You such not an ATM. You such Brandon Hayes. And your name sets back where it belongs. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat too heavy for words. That evening I returned to the workshop. The corkboard above my desk was crowded now. Florist receipt, catering invoice, venue deposit, cancellation slip, lien notices, and at the center, pinned with a thumbtack, was the restitution order, my proof, my vindication. I stood there a long time, staring at it. The hum of the fluorescent light overhead, the smell of oil and steel around me, the faint tick of the wall clock, all the familiar sounds of home. It struck me then how close I had come to losing it all. If I'd handed over that $80,000 check, I would have been erased. Not just from the wedding, from my own legacy. Instead, I had my name back. Later that night, I sat on the porch, bourbon in hand, fireflies blinking across the yard. For once, the drink didn't taste bitter. It tasted earned. The court hadn't given me my daughter back. It hadn't erased the pain of hearing her call me an ATM. But it had given me clarity. I was Nest powerless. I was Nest voiceless. My name was back on the ledger. And for a man like me, who'd spent his life balancing books, invoices, and paychecks, that meant everything. By June, the storm had quieted. The courthouse hearings were over. The vendors had been reimbursed, and the gossip had drifted into silence. What lingered wasn't noise, but reflection. I spent more time on my porch that summer, watching fireflies blink against the humid Cincinnati nights. My workshop still buzzed with engines, but in the evenings I let myself sit, bourbon glass in hand, thinking about the past. People assume legacy is money, a check you write, a sum you leave behind. But I'd learned differently. Legacy isn't ink on paper. It isn't a cashier's check stamped with VOI'd. It's the years you invest, the scraped knees you bandage, the late nights you stay awake to make sure they come home safe, The sacrifices no one sees, no one thanks you for, that's legacy. And no one can erase it with a phone call. One evening, Ruth joined me on the porch. She set down 2 glasses of iced tea, her presence calm as ever. You seem lighter, she said, settling into the chair beside me. I nodded. The court cleared my name. The vendors are done calling. But it sets more than that. She tilted her head. What sets more? I looked out across the yard, fireflies glowing like scattered stars. I realized I didn't set lose a daughter. She gave me away, and there sets a difference. Ruth was quiet for a moment, letting the words hang. Then she nodded. That's Sep's wisdom talking. Hard-earned, but wisdom all the same. I thought about my craft. The vintage cars lined up in my workshop, each one rescued from rust and neglect. Engines rebuilt, frames restored, steel brought back to life piece by piece. I've spent my life fixing machines people thought were finished, I said softly. Turns out I had to rebuild myself the same way. Ruth smiled faintly. And you did. Later that week, I walked through the workshop with a new eye. Every dented fender, every grease-stained rag told a story. This place was more than a business. It was proof that I could take what was broken and make it whole again. That summer, I took on a '69 Camaro restoration, a project that tested every ounce of patience I had. Hours under the hood, weeks of sanding and welding, nights of tuning and tweaking. But when the engine finally roared back to life, it felt like more than a car breathing again. It felt like me. Legacy isn't the money you give away. It's the work you leave behind, the truth you fight for, the dignity you refuse to sell, no matter how high the price. One night, as fireflies danced and the Camaro gleamed under the workshop lights, I whispered to myself, I didn't lose her. She gave me away. And in the end, I found something she couldn't take, myself. By autumn, the leaves in Cincinnati had turned to fire. Red, orange, gold. The air carried that crisp bite that meant another year was winding down. For most people, it was a season of harvest, of family dinners, of gathering close. For Linda and Emily, it was the season their castle crumbled. The first sign came in September. A florist van idled outside their new home, a modest 2-story they'd stretched to afford. The driver knocked, holding an invoice thick as a phone book. No cameras, no crowd, just a quiet demand for payment. Neighbors watched from porches as Linda tried to wave him off, her smile brittle, her voice carrying too loud, but whispers spread faster than excuses. Soon everyone on the block knew the Hayes wedding hadn't just been canceled, it had imploded. By October, the calls from vendors turned into court notices, debt collectors circled. The catering company filed suit. The hotel sought damages for breach of contract. Even the band, a small jazz ensemble from Columbus, demanded compensation for the night they never played. Emily's new husband, once so smug at her side, started showing strain. He stormed out of the house in the evenings, returning late, shoulders tight, words clipped. The shine of newlyweds dulled into something harsher, heavier. I didn't need to be there to see it. I caught glimpses through the same grapevine they had once used to smear me. A cousin at the grocery store muttering, they can even keep up with the bills. A former neighbor whispering, she looks 20 years older since the wedding collapsed. I drove past the courthouse one afternoon in late October. Leaves skittered across the steps, blown by the wind, and there on the bulletin board, pinned under a sheet of plexiglass, were notices, filings, claims, summonses, their names in black ink. I sat in my truck for a while, engine idling, watching the doors swing open and shut. People entered with folders under their arms, left with faces pale and tight. And I thought, this is what happens when you build a castle on lies. The bricks don't hold, the roof caves in. Back at my workshop, I poured a bourbon and stared at the corkboard above my desk. My own folder was thin now. Restitution complete. Vendors reimbursed. My name cleared. Meanwhile, across town, their folder grew heavier by the week. It wasn't joy I felt, not triumph. Just a kind of grim symmetry. The debts they tried to bury me under had found their way back home. By November, the cracks were too wide to hide. Their marriage, barely half a year old, began to buckle under the weight of blame. Emily accused him of poor planning. He accused her of entitlement. Linda pointed fingers at both of them. Arguments spilled onto the lawn, voices carrying through the chilly evening air. Neighbors shut their curtains, but the story still spread. The Hayes name, once tied to parties and promises, was now a punchline whispered over coffee. I kept my distance. Didn't send a word, didn't make a call. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the work. One night driving home, I passed their street. The porch light was on, but the windows were dark. A for sale sign leaned in the yard, its corners curling in the wind. I slowed, watched for a moment, then drove on. No gloating, no satisfaction, just a quiet exhale. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't a blow you strike yourself. It's the silence of watching what they built collapse under its own weight. Back at the workshop, I hung my jacket, washed the grease from my hands, and stood under the hum of the fluorescent light. The Mustang gleamed under the lamp, engine rebuilt, steady and strong. I realized then their collapse wasn't my victory. My victory was here, in this space, in the life I still owned, in the name I'd reclaimed. Their castle had crumbled. Mine still stood. December came cold and sharp in Cincinnati. Snow dusted the streets, turning the workshop windows into frosted panes. Inside, the heater rattled, the Mustang's hood gleamed, and I spent my evenings tuning engines while holiday lights blinked faintly from houses down the block. Life had steadied. The court was behind me. The debts were theirs to carry. My days fell back into rhythm. Coffee in the morning, grease on my hands by noon, bourbon and fireflies turned to bourbon and snowfall by night. Then the card arrived. It was a Thursday evening, mailbox stiff with ice. I sorted through bills, flyers, a Christmas catalog, and then I saw the envelope, Emily's handwriting on the front. My chest tightened as I tore it open, half hopeful, half afraid. Inside was a card, red and gold, a picture of a snow-covered cottage with a wreath on the door, the kind you buy in bulk. I opened it. "Merry Christmas, Dad." That was all. No apology, no explanation. Just 3 words written in her careful hand. And below them, almost as an afterthought, "We such struggling right now. Anything you can help with would mean a lot." My throat closed. Not from joy, not from reconciliation, but from the cold familiarity of it. Another request. Another reach into my pocket. Even after everything, the courtroom, the canceled check, the lies, she still saw me as an ATM. I sat at the kitchen table, the card open before me. The heater clicked, the pipes groaned, the house creaked in the winter wind. Memories rose unbidden, her little hand slipping into mine at the dentist's office, her laugh as she tried on that prom dress, the hug she gave me when I dropped her at college. For a moment, I wanted to believe the card was a crack in the wall, a chance at something more. But the words weren't about love, they were about money. And I had finally learned that legacy isn't written in checks. I rose, walked to the fireplace, and held the card over the flames. The edges curled, blackened, then flared. The snow-covered cottage turned to ash. The words dissolved into smoke. I whispered to the fire, not bitter, not triumphant, just steady. "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." The flames hissed, and the card was gone. I stood there for a long while watching the fire dance. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the world in silence. Later that night, I walked into the workshop. The Camaro Restoration gleamed in the corner. The Mustang sat proud under its cover, and the corkboard above my desk held its mosaic of receipts, invoices, slips, and orders, proof of everything I had endured. I didn't need the card. I didn't need an apology that would never come, because I still had my name, my work, my truth. Christmas passed quietly. Ruth visited with a casserole. We drank coffee on the porch, snow crunching under boots. Mark stopped by with a bottle of good bourbon, raising the glass to survival, to justice, to peace. And me? I sat with them, warm in the glow of the workshop lights, heart steady. I had learned the hardest lesson. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, but who stands with you when the world tries to erase you. The year ended with snow still on the ground, engines still humming, my life still mine, and their castle of lies, Now, nothing but ruins.